This is environment and development. After looking at this module, you will be in a better position to understand what the connection is between economic development and environment. Again, you will understand what sustainable development is. What is the concept, sustainable development? How can we look at it? What are the criticisms of the concept? What are the challenges to it? And what is the strategy in which to achieve sustainable development? It will help you in every way, not only in understanding economics, but also in your daily conduct of life. Because environment is something which is always around us. You are never without environment. Nothing exists in vacuum. Environment is thus the totality of what exists around us, all the time with us. And economics is the study of mankind in the everyday business of life. So what is the impact, what is the interconnection between this everyday business of life in which we not only draw breath but go to the market, live, progress, improve our standard of living, as well as the world around us, as well as the world which we will leave for the posterity, for future generations and so on. Environment, the word can be taken in several senses. Like when you are talking of a business scenario, you say this is the business environment. When you are talking of the space, outer space, galaxies, you say that this is the galactic environment. And you talk of economic development and economic environment. Natural environment is really the natural and phenomena, the natural resources, all that exist all around us, the world in which economic principles really operate. Now this environment, this economic environment, which is the natural environment exploited for economic use, consists of two kinds of resources. Natural resources which are renewable and natural resources which are non-renewable. Renewable natural resources like wood, etc., they grow naturally when we use them up. But non-renewable natural resources, for example coal, do not grow naturally after we have used them. So we have to be really concerned, we have to be really considerate in using these non-renewable natural resources, as well as take care that the renewable natural resources are also renewed. They are not going to grow out of nothing. We have to take care of them.
After studying this module, you shall be able to know what environment means in the context of economics. Learn about various international agreements on environment and economics. Identify challenges to sustainable development. Evaluate the situation of various countries in respect of environment and development, and analyze the strategy towards sustainable development. Nothing exists in a vacuum. The environment is the totality of what exists around something or someone. It is constituted by animate and inanimate, natural and artificial forces. The environment provides conditions for growth as well as for deterioration. By reacting constantly to the environment, all creatures and all things affect it just as it affects them. Environment is a wider term than nature. While nature would include only elements like soil, water, plants, birds, animals, and people, environment includes man-made elements like buildings, townships, infrastructure, and communication systems. In fact, the word environment is used in very many ways. Business environment refers to the competitive conditions among producers. Galactic environment refers to conditions between stars in the sky. Natural environment refers to all the gifts of nature, and environmentalists say that human beings must live in harmony with the environment and even protect it. The environment contains renewable and non-renewable natural resources. Renewable natural resources, for example, wood, grow naturally when used. Non-renewable natural resources, for example, minerals like coal, do not. Both are matters of concern in today's rapidly growing world. Now we will start with understanding the relationship between economic development and environment. UN Concern in Stockholm, 1972. In 1972 at Stockholm, there was a United Nations conference on the human environment, on the need for a common outlook and for common principles to inspire and guide the peoples of the world in the preservation and enhancement of the human environment. Among many other valuable principles, it proclaimed three principles. Let us start with the first principle. Man has the fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of a quality that permits a life of dignity and well being, and he bears a solemn responsibility to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations. In this respect, policies promoting or perpetuating racial segregation, discrimination, colonial and other forms of oppression, and foreign domination stand condemned and must be eliminated. Principle 2. The natural resources of the earth, including the air, water, land, flora and fauna, and especially representative samples of natural ecosystems, must be safeguarded for the benefit of present and future generations through careful planning or management as appropriate. Principle 3. The capacity of the earth to produce vital renewable resources must be maintained and wherever practicable, restored or improved. It is these three principles that developed into the present concern for environment in relation to economics. The Millennium Goals. In 2000, there was the Millennium Summit of the United Nations at New York, which included the goal, the seventh goal or target, to ensure environmental sustainability. This was spelled out in terms of four separate targets. Target 7A. Integrate the principles of sustainable development into country policies and programs. Reverse the loss of environmental resources. Target 7B. Reduce biodiversity loss, achieving by 2010 a significant reduction in the rate of loss of environmental resources. Target 7C. By 2015, halve the proportion of the population without sustainable access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation. Target 7D. By 2020, to achieve a significant improvement in the lives of at least 100 million slum dwellers. India, as one of the 189 dignitaries at the summit, also became committed to this goal.
What is this concept of sustainable development? Let's come to this now. What is the concept? The term sustainable development was first coined in 1980 by the United Nations Environment Program, UNDP, which collaborated with other international organizations like the UNESCO and formed what is known as a world conservation strategy. It is conservation which is important. We must conserve what we have inherited, not just squander it away. In 1987, there was a Brundtland Commission. Now, this commission again has reported on environment and development. This Brundtland Commission is extremely important in chalking out what sustainable development means. Sustainable development means development without undermining the sustainability of natural resources. If people exceed what their due quota is, if people exploit the system, then the system, the ecosystem breaks down. Excessive use combined with pollution of natural resources exhausts the economy. So in the long run, we do not have enough resources left. Future generations find their inheritance depleted. Economic development thus has to proceed in a judicious manner. It is not enough to have a high rate of growth of GDP, literacy, enrollment, etc. It has also to be in such a fashion that resources are left for all people to share in the present and all people also to share in the future. A better future for all. This is the most important consideration so far as Millennium Goals, etc. are concerned. Now we find that this thing actually can be diagrammatized, and we find that economy, society, environment, all three are bound up, connected in some sort of a circular fashion. Society impacts on economy, economy impacts on society, both of them impact on environment, and so the wheel proceeds.
Sustainable development means development without undermining the sustainability of natural resources. If people use them excessively for their luxuries, the system breaks down. Excessive use combined with pollution of natural resources exhaust the economy in the long run. Future generations will find their inheritance depleted. Economic development thus has to proceed in a judicious manner. It is not enough to have a high rate of growth of GDP, PPP or not, or a high literacy and enrollment, or even high life expectancy.
However, some people have also criticized the concept. Some people say that, well, by saying that we must have sustainable development, etc., we are really postponing. We are going to exhaust this eventually. Is that necessary? Well, it is a big question actually. It is a very, very complex problem. There are people who have experimented with simple living in rural settings using the least of air polluting or noise polluting equipment, machines, etc. Tolstoy, Thoreau, Gandhiji himself and Rabindranath Tagore have experimented with educational institutions, ashrams, etc. in pristine surroundings, rural surroundings, where you have certain modern amenities, but you achieve them without really disturbing the ecological balance. However, the reality is there. How much have we gone back to those institutes, those institutions? We do seem to be, sort of forging ahead on a different track altogether. So therefore, all the more reason that we should have sustainable development as one of our very important objectives. We are developing the way the Western world has developed, mad path of going forward. They themselves have realized that this is a mad path, and so they have brought reason to bear upon it. It is the Western world which recognizes the need to have sustainable development. So Indian and Asian countries also should recognize its importance. And in these days of globalization, Western as well as Eastern, all the entire world should come together in preserving sustainable development.
To a few people, the concept of sustainable development is essentially flawed because it implies the postponement rather than the elimination of doom. Perhaps a return to the pristine surroundings of primitive life can save the doom from falling. But that being a practical absurdity, India has to go along the lines of sustainable development.
There are certain challenges to sustainable development. One very important challenge to sustainable development is the rapid growth of population. I mean, if there are people and people and people forging ahead, growing and so on, after all, the world has a limit on its natural resources. If we do not have any control on population, then this challenge remains. Then poverty and inequality. Not only do we have enormous population, growing population in the eastern parts of the world, we also have poor population, population which is unequal, population which is torn apart. So poverty and inequality, they have a destructive effect on the ecosystem. Because of poverty and inequality, certain very injudicious measures are taken which impinge on the sustainability of development. Shortage of drinking water, again, in many regions of the world is itself a threat to sustainable development. Because drinking water is short, we exploit it, we dig it out in any way possible, and that really disturbs the water basin in the world as such, on earth as such. Too much of these tube wells, too much of these pumping out of water out of the earth's crust is not good for the world itself, for the earth itself. And earth is a planet within the solar system and within the galaxy. So it is going to create havoc if we just exploit it senselessly. Then of course there is disease, malnutrition, lack of medical facilities. Because of this, again, we just go on exploiting unthinkingly whatever the earth has provided. And energy, petrol, all the oil, all the petroleum that the earth's crust contains. Nowadays, I mean, so many cars and so many diesel engine operated mechanisms, we are again very unthinkingly exploiting, not only exploiting, over exploiting all that there is provided for us as well as posterity. So somehow we must keep a check on this. Cutting down all the forests, deforestation, etc. We all know that, it loses the earth's crust, it disturbs the rainfall, and also creates other tidal waves and other such natural disasters. What are we really doing to control all this? This is some problem that has to be checked, and these are the challenges to environmental and economical friendliness. Economics and the environment, they have to be friendly together. There has to be some kind of a companionship between them which we are ignoring.
Let us now discuss the challenges to sustainable development. Population. The rapid growth of population is a major challenge for sustainable development because it creates shortages of drinking water, arable land for food production, housing, education, and other infrastructural facilities. Poverty and inequality have a destructive effect on the ecosystems. They necessitate the growth of food production at the expense of nature, thereby causing biodiversity loss. The shortage of drinking water in many regions of the world is itself a threat to sustainable development. The way it looks, by 2025, every second person in the world will suffer from water shortage. Disease, malnutrition, and the lack of medical facilities are also an obstacle in sustainable development. In many cases, deaths in developing countries are avoidable. Humanity should direct more attention and money in the coming years to the struggle against disease. The imminent task is to reduce the death rate among children under 5 years of age by two-thirds and the death rate of young mothers by 75% by 2015. Deforestation, due to the expansion of agriculture and the increase of urbanization, is a massive problem for sustainable development. The world's forests diminish mainly due to the expansion of agriculture. In the coming years, improving the recovery and management of forests will be of utmost importance. The rising consumption of energy and petrol is a further problem. This is emphasized by the Kyoto Protocol 1997 to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, an international treaty that sets binding obligations on industrialized countries to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases.
Now, this sort of thing, uh, like in economics, we try to quantify everything, we try to measure everything. Instead of remaining a philosophical concept or abstract concept, somehow we have tried also to find a measure for sustainable development. This is the ecological footprint. The ecological footprint is an accounting device for biocapacity. For 2007, humanity's total ecological footprint was estimated at 1.5 planet Earths. That is, humanity uses ecological services 1.5 times, 1.5 times as quickly as Earth can renew them. So the Earth does renew itself, but we are finishing it up faster than the Earth can keep up with us. So this is a very important consideration to be kept in mind.
A measure of sustainable development, the ecological footprint. This is a measure of human demand on the Earth's ecosystem. It is an accounting device for biocapacity. For 2007, humanity's total ecological footprint was estimated at 1.5 planet Earths. That is, humanity uses ecological services 1.5 times as quickly as Earth can renew them. The United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, UNCSD, or Earth Summit 2012, was the third international conference on sustainable development. According to the data presented to the United Nations, Cuba was the only nation in the world in 2006 that met the Worldwide Fund for Nature's definition of sustainable development with an ecological footprint of less than 1.8 hectares per capita, 1.5 hectares, and a human development index of over 0.8 or 0.855. In 2007, the USA had an economic footprint of 8.00 global hectares per person and a biocapacity of 3,87 GH per person, such that the ecological deficit or remainder came out to be minus 4.13. Canada had an economic footprint of 7.01 global hectares per person and a biocapacity of 14.92 GH per person, such that the ecological deficit or remainder came out to be 7.91, a big plus.
There is this inverse relationship between economic development and ecology, and India has been depicting this by persisting in having a deficit and a growing deficit. We have to take care of our ecological footprint, and the ecological footprint that we leave on Earth should not be a deficit one, should be a surplus one. We should contribute rather than only detract from what the Earth provides.
In 2003, India's per person ecological footprint was 0.75 global hectares and per person biocapacity was 0.4 global hectares, implying an ecobiological definition of minus 3.5. By 2007, this deficit had increased. In 2007, India had an economic footprint of 0.91 and a biocapacity of 0.51 GH per person, making the deficit minus zero point 0.40. The Republic of Congo in 2007 had an ecological footprint of 0.96 and a biocapacity per person of 13.27, making the ecological deficit to be 12.31. Strategy for sustainable development. India needs to evolve an effective strategy for sustainable development on the following lines. Judicious use of natural resources like trees and minerals, remembering the needs of future generations. All possible attempts to replenish renewable resources, for example, by planting trees, and minimize the pollution of air, water, etc. Using of environmental friendly sources of energy such as LPG and CNG, which are eco-friendly fuel, can reduce the greenhouse gases from the earth. Delhi Transport Corporation's initiative to bring CNG buses into Delhi is one such effort to reduce CO2 and other harmful gases. Ensure strict control and watch with respect to environmental hazards such as the Bhopal gas tragedy. Revive ethnic Indian systems of irrigation and waterways. Implement integrated rural development programs which can reduce the pressure on urban areas and associated pollution. Focus on renewable sources of energy like the sun and the wind for energy needs. Tropical countries like India can easily convert sunlight into solar energy and electricity and create an atmosphere for green development. Stimulate organic farming and recycling waste. Sustainable development is a visionary approach towards the future. It will not be brought about by merely policy making. It requires the spreading of awareness of the need to conserve the natural assets for intergenerational equity.
Now, to summarize these points, which I hope will be useful for you, let us first go over the basic idea of environment. Environment is the totality of the animate and the inanimate, natural and artificial forces that exist around an economy. Secondly, the second point to remember is that various international meetings have emphasized the close relationship between environment and economic development, especially from 1972. Two landmark institutional meetings, international institutional meetings are the Brundtland Commission in 1987 and the Millennium Summit of the United Nations at New York in 2000. The term sustainable development has emerged really because of these international meetings. Coined in the 1980s, the term sustainable development means development that meets the needs of the present without compromising, without jeopardizing the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The ecological footprint is a measure of sustainable development. This measure shows us how much we are using up the Earth's resources, which is at the rate of 1.5. That is, whatever we get, we are using it up 1.5 times more. So this way, if we proceed, the footprint is not going to lead anywhere. Sustainable development has many challenges. This we must remember as the next important point. Depletion of natural resources, pollution, poverty, malnutrition, all sorts of challenges are there to sustainable development. So sustainable development, to be successful, to be achieved, is difficult, and it requires governmental as well as non-governmental efforts, individual, collective, all kinds of efforts to exercise restraint in the exploitation of natural resources, emitting waste, and really mucking up, literally, whatever we have inherited from Mother Nature.